We're back out here at the Big Lake once again, and today we're talking about the very best colors you should be using for your soft plastics, your crankbaits, and everything else whenever your water has got some stain to it. Stick around, you don't want to miss this one. And here is this video's featured comment. Congratulations! If you would like to have a chance to have your comment featured in an upcoming video, all you've got to do is leave a comment. And now, on with the video. Welcome back to Lowbrow Fishing. And today, we're talking about the colors I like to use whenever that water's got some dinge to it, whenever there's like that green haze. It's kind of clear. You can see plants, you can see hydrilla, you can make out structure and things like that, but it's almost like there's a fog, and it's 2 or 3 feet visibility, but it's not like a hard line like there is whenever it's muddy, whenever there's a lot of silt and everything kicked up. This is like whenever the water has been subjected to a lot of boat traffic, or it's been windy and it's just had a lot of silt and whatnot kicked up. It's still pretty clear, but there's just this haze to it. Now, a lot of times, whenever the water's like that, good old green pumpkin, well, it just gets lost in the haze. It disappears into the background. And I've never been one for matching the hatch. You guys know that by now. I've said it enough times. I want to make it easy for the bass. I want my colors to stand out against the background. I want my baits to be attractive to the fish, just to be easy to get, right? Bass are inherently lazy. Laziness is a great survival technique because the less energy you expend to consume something, the less energy you expend to feed or do anything, the more energy you have to do other things, such as getting away from threats or reproduction. So being lazy is a good evolutionary trait. So my go-to colors, the things that I like to use right off of the bat, are usually, well, Junebug. Junebug for me is a great all-around color. Unless it's clear bluebird sky and the water is gin clear, I'm not using green pumpkin. I'm using Junebug. This is my starting point. If that water's got just a little bit of haze to it, it's got a little bit of tinge to it, we've got some cloud cover, and even if the winds are calm, this is going to stand out against that background. But it's also going to look natural enough and enticing enough that those fish who are curious by nature will be attracted to this. And I get plenty of bites with that in mind. Like I said, starting out with Junebug with a light dinge, a light bit of haze, clear skies, or even cloudy skies, it doesn't really matter. This is where I start out with. This is my go-to. And I know a lot of guys, they say that's going against the grain. You want to match the hatch. You want to throw green pumpkin or watermelon red. But I'm telling you what, try starting out with a darker color. Black blue flake, Junebug. I'm telling you, there really is a difference. First of all, your bait's going to stand out against the background. And if you've got a natural and enticing presentation that will appeal to the fish, they will inhale this. And this is not going to be what everybody else is throwing. Everybody else is throwing watermelon red and green pumpkin. So the fish are going to get burnt on that. They're going to get conditioned on this. These are going to pique their curiosity. So recently, I did a video where my wife and we went out to a private trophy bass lake. And, well, my wife kicked my butt, and all she used was a Zebco 33 as she caught multiple 3-pound plus fish. It was great. But that water had a bit of stain to it. It was very much like the Big Lake is today. And some of the colors that my wife was using, well, she was just dragging a worm. Nothing fancy, letting it sit there. And the first color she started off with was just a regular old, this cream worm like this. It's got blue underbelly. It's got a little bit darker backside. Something like this. It stood out very nice against that tannic water, against that green stained water. And I did put a tail spinner on it at first, but she ended up losing that, and it didn't make a difference in the long run. They were still biting those off-colored worms because they stood out against the background. Now, another nice fish that she caught was on a bubblegum pink Strike King Ocho. Now, this isn't a Strike King Ocho, but it was the same color. It's the same idea. A pink worm. I don't know about you, but I've never seen a pink shad or a pink bluegill. So this is not something that is natural. It certainly doesn't match the hatch, but in that water, it stood out. It got a bass's curiosity, and the bass decided it was going to inhale it, And well, it was a great fish. You know, it was a lot of fun for her to catch. I think it actually ended up breaking the reel, but as you can see here, as we pull it up into the boat, that's a bright pink worm. And that fish was latched onto that worm. It wanted to eat that worm. So the color didn't really matter. It could see it. It was curious about it. So it did what bass do. It inhaled it. And there just happened to be a hook inside. And my wife ended up bringing it to the boat. Now, on our very last day there, she switched to a white trickworm. And this was another color that stood out very vibrantly in that light stain. Um, it kind of glows. Whenever you got the right color, now I've heard Matt Steffen talk about this. If you've heard him talk about it, he's exactly right. If your bait has a little bit of a glow to it, then you know you're onto something. You know it's really sticking out against that background, and you know those fish can really see it and they can key off on it. You don't have to jerk it around and give it a whole bunch of action. Let it dead stick. Let it sit there. Let that worm do its job. Just let it sit there. And you'll be surprised at how often you'll get bit. You'll go to pick up your rod and there's a bass on it. Or you'll look and you'll see your line running out. I was busy taking the hook out of the fish and, well, she was getting a bite. She was trying to record me with the phone and boom, she was getting a bite. And that was on one of these, just a regular white trickworm, Texas rig, nothing fancy. She threw it out there. It was sitting on the bottom of the lake, just sitting there, doing nothing. While she's recording me and I'm taking the hook out of a fish, you see clearly, boom, she got a bite. So that's something else. That lure stood out. The fish was interested and it ended up biting it. Now, moving on to an even higher contrasting color, right? Is something like this chartreuse worm. And this guy really paid dividends for me today. This is almost like a glow stick, right? You remember those old glow stick? You break them and you shake them up and they start glowing. Well, that's basically the effect this has underwater. I fished this on a weightless wacky rig and I caught a nice tank on this exact worm. Now, I wish that I had the full footage from the fight with this fish. Unfortunately, my GoPro battery died just before I hooked into it, because of course it did. And all I have is the recording of me weighing the fish and taking a picture with the fish afterwards. But either way, this bait is what caught that fish. It stood out, just that wacky rig, that little do nothing, letting it slow fall, let slow fall. And that fish inhaled it. It was a very subtle approach, especially if your body of water, your fishery, happens to be exceptionally pressured. You've heard me say it time and time again. The big lake here, well, it's not really all that big. It's just over 600 acres. And in the area in South Mississippi that I live, there is nearly 1 million people that live here now. This lake is way too small for that population. And there will be 100 boats on this lake in the weekend. That's way too much pressure. And those fish, they get lockjaw. And the best way to get them to open up is by doing something completely different. And you do it in such a way that it doesn't scare them off. Something like this. This is a deep we are. This is a Rebel deep we are. I'm sure we've all had one. But in this tannic water, in this stained water, this is another one that shows off like a beacon. It's like a glowing orb that goes through the water. And I'm not burning this. I'm actually just kind of pulling it along with my rod and then winding in the slack, and then pulling it along with my rod and then winding in the slack. And that's how I'm getting bit with this. But it shows up very brightly. I fish this. There's a hump. Well, actually, there's several points that I'm fishing this off of that have humps on them, and I just bring this right by, and I'm able to get good fish in that darker, deeper water that has less sun penetration. I can get this down to, I don't know, maybe 8 feet, 10 feet, depending on the line. But down there, there's a lot less light penetration. It's going to be darker. And this, in that deeper stained water, this still shows up. And obviously, it's got the rattles on it. That vibration is going to key them in to begin with. But then those fish, well, once they see this, they just envelop it. And lastly, this lipless crank right here. This is from Ozark Trails. This is just your regular generic, you know, gold lipless crank. And a lot of times you'll hear guys say, throw gold when it's cloudy. That's true. You can throw gold when it's cloudy and it works great. But I also throw gold whenever that water has some stain to it. I'm not throwing chrome unless it's bluebird skies and that water is gin clear. I'm throwing gold otherwise because that's got a little bit more flash to it. It's got a little bit more radiance to it, and the fish seem to be more attracted to it. Now, you can see here in the video, but taken from the trophy bass lake that we were just at. Now, even though they're dinks, even though they're small, I have this gold Guggen clutch tied on, and I can make cast after cast. And I was pulling those fish off of this log. Obviously, we wanted more size, but that gold flash, that's what they were keyed in on. I was even fishing a little George, and that little George had a gold spinner on the back of it. And that's something else. It had that gold flash. That is what those bass were keyed off onto. And I was able to get 5 or 6 bites right in a row because, you know, the gold flash has, like I said, it's got more radiance to it. Now, had there been bigger fish in the area, which we would have hoped that there had been, but just didn't turn out to be that day, I believe it would have been the same effect. The bass are keyed in on that radiance, on something that attracts their attention. And I was fishing this pretty slowly. So it's what worked for me. So you've got to go out on a limb sometimes. You've got to not be afraid to throw those really bright, loud colors. Now, you don't want to do it all the time because under the wrong conditions, they are certainly off-putting to those bass. You've got to have the right conditions. And for me, that's when that water has got some stain to it. We're not talking chocolate milk, but if it's got that haze to it, right? It's like looking through the fog. You know, whenever you're living on your street, right? You go out of the house in the morning and you look out and you see the fog, but you can't see your neighbor's house 3 or 4 houses down, but you can see your next door neighbor's house pretty good. Something like that. You know, you can still see, you still have 2 or 3 feet of visibility underwater, but there's just this dark haze that just gets thicker as it goes. That's when I'm throwing the bright chartreuse, and I'm throwing the green, and I'm throwing the pink, and I'm throwing the white, and I'm throwing gold flashy baits. That's what's going to work for me. You know, I start with something like black blue flake, I start with something like June bug, and then I work my way out from there, letting the bass tell me what it is they want. So there you have it. You can't be afraid to go out on a limb and throw some crazy colors sometimes. Sometimes it's exactly what the doctor ordered and exactly what those bass want. You can stand out not only under the water, but from other anglers on the lake and entice those bass when that bite gets really tough. Thanks for watching Lowbrow Fishing. We'll catch you in the next one.